Welcome to Karen Universe, where we dive into every wild, quirky, and intriguing story out there. When the HOA banned snow removal after 8 pm, I started following at 5 am, and just like that, the whole neighborhood wake up, watch now, challenged their restriction, and left everyone honest. In the end, what happened to find out, make sure to watch the video.
At 8:01 p.m., the neighborhood went silent, and so did my patience. The HOA's new rule bans snowblowers after dark, claiming the sound disturbed evening tranquility. That night, a blizzard swallowed our street, and every driveway became a white cliff. I stared at the rule taped to my door and decided to obey it perfectly, just not the way they expected. I set my alarm for 4:45 a.m. The sky was still ink, the houses asleep, and the snowblower waited like a small engine with a secret. At exactly 5, I pulled the cord. The machine roared to life, and the quiet shattered into echoes that ran down the block. Porch lights blinked on like startled eyes. Windows opened. Someone shouted my name. I waved and kept moving, carving a path down the center of the street as if I were plowing a runway. Snow curled into silver walls behind me. The cold bit my cheeks, and the engine sang a steady, stubborn song. I followed the rule's letter and broke its spirit. By 5:12, the HOA group chat exploded. Messages stacked like drifts, complaints, warnings, threats of fines. I replied with a photo of the rule and a timestamp from my watch. After 8 p.m., I wrote, "It's morning." The replies paused, then returned louder. A patrol car rolled by, slow and curious. The officer leaned out and asked what I was doing. I told him I was helping the neighborhood wake up to winter. He laughed, checked the sign on my door, and drove on. More doors opened. A man in slippers demanded peace. A woman filmed from her porch. A school bus tried to turn and slid sideways, blocked by untouched snow beyond my fresh lane. I widened the pass and watched the tires find grip. The bus crawled through, and the driver gave me a thumbs up. At sunrise, the street looked different. Clean lines cut through the mess. Footprints stitched across the banks. The HOA president arrived with a clipboard and a voice tuned to noon. She read the rule aloud, twice, then stared at her watch. I shut off the blower and listened to the snow settle. Later, an official notice arrived by email, promising a meeting and a review. Neighbors argued over coffee, some praising clear roads, others demanding silence. I packed earplugs for myself and extra fuel for the machine, ready to prove that timing can be louder than noise and fairness can sound like an engine. This lesson would travel farther than snow ever could that winter morning alone. By noon, a meeting notice appeared on every mailbox and inbox, stamped urgent and signed by 3 HOA officers who had never touched a shovel. The subject line read, "Noise violations and community harmony." I went, wearing boots still dusted with salt, and sat in the back where the folding chairs wobbled like opinions. The president opened with a smile that could freeze coffee. She spoke about respect, rest, and the delicate balance of shared living. Then she showed a printed photo of me behind my snowblower, timestamp glowing like evidence. "This," she said, "is not harmony." I raised my hand and read the rule aloud. After 8 p.m. The room murmured. A man who commuted before dawn said he needed clear roads. A nurse said quiet nights mattered too. The board whispered among themselves, shuffling papers as if snow could be reorganized. They proposed a compromise, designated plowing hours, supervised, with a decibel cap measured from the sidewalk. Someone asked how to measure wind. Someone else asked who would supervise a blizzard. The president tapped her pen and announced a trial period starting tomorrow. That night, the forecast deepened its voice. Snow arrived in heavy, patient sheets. I set the alarm again and fueled the machine with the care of a pilot. At 5, I started on my driveway and kept to the middle of the street, tracing yesterday's path. The engine echoed off closed garages, and the sky turned pale like paper. This time, neighbors were waiting. A woman brought coffee. The bus returned, slower, steadier. The patrol car waved. I kept the pace even and the path wide, thinking about harmony and how it often means the loudest clock sets the time. At 6:30, the president appeared with 2 board members and a portable meter. They stood at the curb, holding it out like a truce flag. The screen blinked numbers that meant nothing to Snow. Wind gusted, and the reading jumped. The president frowned and wrote something down. By breakfast, the street was open again. The group chat went quiet, then split into 2 currents, gratitude and grievance. I sent no photos. I cleaned the chute and stored the blower. In the afternoon, a new email arrived. The board thanked community volunteers and asked for sign UPS for morning clearing. A schedule followed, neat and optimistic. My name was already on it. I signed up for every storm. Not to win, but to keep the road honest. Rules are tools, and tools need hands. Winter teaches that balance is not silence, it is movement that everyone can use. The trial schedule turned the block into a clock. My slot was 5 to 6, Tuesdays and Thursdays, with weather permitting in small print that never meant anything. I learned the routes like lines on a palm: start at the cul-de-sac, cut the drift near the hydrant, widen the turn by the school stop. The machine behaved, but people did not. On the first scheduled morning, a man in a bathrobe blocked the curb with a trash bin and said I was early. My watch said 5. His phone said 5. He said Harmony needed sleep. I said Harmony needed traction. We stared at the snow until it chose for us and slid his bin into the street. I cleared around it and moved on. A clipboard appeared at the corner with check boxes and a pen on a string. Neighbors marked times, noise, and attitude. Someone drew a smiley face. Someone drew a storm cloud. By the 3rd storm, the page filled with signatures like a petition for weather. The president sent reminders about the decibel cap. Wind made a liar of the meter, and the meter made a liar of the rule. When the reading spiked, she frowned and asked me to idle. I did, and the snow thickened, and the bus skidded again. She nodded and told me to proceed, as if permission could steer ice. A rumor grew that I enjoyed the noise. I didn't. I enjoyed mornings that worked. The nurse waved from her porch. The commuter left a thermos on my step. The man with the bin moved it without a word. Small adjustments piled up like plowed banks, shaping a lane wide enough for disagreement. One dawn, the machine coughed and died halfway down the block. Silence fell so fast it felt heavy. Doors opened, not to complain but to look. I pushed, sweating, carving a narrow trench by hand. 3 neighbors joined me with shovels. We moved like a team that had always existed. By the time the tow rope arrived, the road was passable. The president wrote mechanical failure on the clipboard and underlined it twice. The meter stayed in her pocket. Winter kept coming. The schedule bent. 5 became flexible. Harmony learned to wake up early. I learned that rules are maps, not roads, and storms redraw both. The engine roared again the next week, and the block answered with lights, not anger. We were not friends. We were functional. In a season that buries edges, that felt like a victory loud enough to hear without a machine. Even the chat learned restraint, trading outrage for updates about plow times, safe turns, and who needed help before dawn in the cold and dark hours together. The first official complaint arrived wrapped in polite language and sharp intent. It accused me of weaponized compliance, a phrase that sounded like Snow had learned to argue. The board scheduled another meeting, this one with a lawyer on speakerphone and a slide that showed decibel charts like weather maps. I listened as they described mornings as disruptions and evenings as rights. I asked if emergencies counted. The lawyer paused, then said rules should be flexible but consistent. The president nodded as if that settled something. They proposed a revision: no snowblowers before 7 a.m. or after 8 p.m., with fines for violations and an appeal process that took 10 business days. I pointed out the bus stop, the nurse's shift, the commuter's curb by the hydrant. The lawyer suggested shovels. I suggested physics. Snow, I said, does not wait for business hours. The room warmed with voices. The decision was tabled, which felt like a promise to forget. That night, the storm arrived sideways. By 4:30, the street had vanished. I checked the old rule and the new draft and chose the only thing that worked. I started at 5 again, carving a spine down the block. The engine sounded like a clock with teeth. At 5:18, a notice hit my phone: cease operation. Rule under review. I kept moving. At 5:24, another message: final warning. At 5:31, the bus radioed that it was stuck 2 streets over. I turned and widened the lane to the corner, then cut a ramp to the stop. A squad car rolled up and idled. The officer asked about the messages. I showed him the rule on my door and the draft on my phone. He shrugged and said safety beat drafts. He watched the bus pull free and told me to finish the pass and head home. By breakfast, the chat had chosen sides again. The president posted a photo of the meter with a red circle. The nurse posted a photo of the cleared stop with a green heart. Someone posted a video of the bus climbing the ramp like a ship out of ice. The board issued a statement: a temporary exception for severe weather, with supervision. I signed the sheet and fueled the machine. Supervision arrived with a clipboard and a scarf, and we walked the block together like surveyors, measuring not sound but distance between needs. Winter teaches through repetition. By the 4th storm, the exception felt like the rule. By the 6th, the rule felt like a rumor. We learned to text before dawn, to flag hazards, to share salt. The complaint aged into a footnote. The street stayed open. I didn't win. The block did. And every morning at 5, the engine spoke a language the snow understood, while the rules learned to listen, and the neighborhood learned to wake up to a road that belonged to all of us again. The next storm didn't bring just snow. It brought flyers. Someone taped them to mailboxes and lampposts overnight, printed in bold letters: quiet hours mean quiet. Underneath, a grainy photo of my snowblower looked like a wanted poster. By sunrise, half the street had seen it, and the other half pretended not to. I followed the schedule and started at 5. The engine roared, and the flyers fluttered like surrender flags. A man filmed from his porch and narrated like a reporter. A woman clapped when the bus rolled through. The wind carried both sounds down the block, mixing applause with complaints. At the corner, the president waited with the lawyer and a new decibel meter that looked more serious than the last. They stood close to the chute, and the numbers jumped. There, the lawyer said. That's over. I pointed to the bus stop, buried again. That's under, I said. The president rubbed her temples and asked me to idle while they measured farther back. I did. The meter calmed. The snow did not. A text arrived from the nurse: ambulance can't reach Oak. I cut left and opened a lane to the cross street. The filmer caught it all. The lawyer cleared his throat. The president nodded once. Proceed, she said, and wrote a note on her pad that looked like a truce. By mid-morning, the chat was a courtroom. The flyer crowd posted screenshots of noise graphs. The helpers posted photos of cleared ramps and tire tracks. Someone dug up the city code and pasted it like scripture. Someone else pasted the weather warning in all caps. That afternoon, a package arrived on my step: ear defenders and a thank you card with no name. I hung the flyers in my garage as trophies of a battle that didn't end the war but changed the weather. The board called an emergency vote and adopted a clause, safety operations exempt during active storms. It came with a promise to review in spring and a request that I coordinate with them. I agreed, because coordination is just a quieter word for trust. The next dawn, I started at 5 and found cones placed by neighbors to mark the bus stop and hydrant. The filmer brought coffee instead of a phone. The meter stayed in the trunk. The road opened like a zipper. Winter kept testing us. Each storm asked the same question, noise or motion. We learned the answer together. Quiet hours stayed on paper. Clear paths stayed on the street. And when the flyers peeled off in the sun, their tape left pale squares that looked like scars, proof that even small rules can leave marks when they forget who has to walk on them. The storm that changed everything arrived without drama, just a steady fall that hid danger under calm. I woke at 4:30 to a text from the group chat, power flickering. Another followed, road icing fast. The schedule said 5, but the street didn't care about ink on paper. I started the blower early and moved slow, letting the blade chew through the crust before it could harden. Halfway down the block, the lights went out. Houses vanished into shadow, and the only sound left was the engine and the wind. I cut a lane wide enough for a single car and marked the hydrant with a cone. At the corner, a sedan sat sideways, wheels spinning like coins. I waved the driver back and widened the turn, throwing snow into neat banks that reflected the moon. The bus didn't come that morning. Instead, a van from the electric company crept in, tires hunting for grip. I guided it with my arm and kept clearing ahead, opening a path to the transformer near the school stop. The crew worked with headlamps, and the street watched from dark windows. When the power returned, porch lights blinked on in a wave. Doors opened. The filmer put his phone away and grabbed a shovel. The man with the bin carried salt. The nurse stood on her steps and clapped once, slow and deliberate. No one mentioned the rule. No one mentioned the meter. We finished the block together and shared thermoses like a treaty. By noon, the board sent an email without charts. It thanked all residents who assisted during the outage and proposed a standing safety protocol for storms, early clearing allowed when conditions threatened access. They asked for volunteers. The list filled in minutes. That evening, someone tore down the last faded flyer and left a note on the post, "Clear roads save sleep too." The sentence wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. The next storm came and went with less noise than before. I still started at 5, but now cones appeared without asking, and texts arrived with hazards marked. The lawyer stopped attending dawns. The meter retired to a drawer. The president brought a clipboard only to record who needed help first. Winter didn't end the arguments, it ended the excuse to avoid them. We learned that timing could be flexible when purpose was clear. The rule stayed, amended with words like active storm and emergency access. It read like something written by people who had stood in the cold. On the last heavy snowfall, I shut off the engine at sunrise and listened. The block sounded different, doors closing, boots on steps, a car starting without slipping. Quiet returned on its own, not by force but by function. I parked the blower and wrote one line on the sign by my door: "If the road is safe, the neighborhood can rest." No one argued. The snow melted, and so did the need to prove anything. We had found the middle, and it felt like a road you could drive on. Spring arrived like an audit, and the board called a review meeting to decide whether winter's exceptions had rewritten the rulebook or merely bruised it. Neighbors filled the room with coats draped over chairs and memories stacked behind eyes, ready to measure what worked together again. The president opened with a timeline of storms, outages, and bus delays, then asked for facts instead of feelings. Charts stayed folded while residents spoke about ramps, cones, and mornings that started early but ended safely. Data arrived by way of tire tracks and open doors. I described routes and choke points, the hydrant that iced first, the curve that hid black glass, and the minutes saved when we cleared before dawn. The lawyer nodded and wrote nothing while the filmer set down his phone and picked up a pen slowly there. A vote followed, not about noise but about notice, creating a protocol that triggered early clearing when weather met a simple threshold of risk. Supervision shifted to a rotating pair of neighbors with cones and radios to mark hazards before engines ever started that day together. The change felt small until the first April storm dusted the street and tested the language we had chosen. I waited for the text that read active storm, then cleared only the corners and stopped before the sun finished the rest without help from of us. People noticed because nothing broke, not the rule and not the quiet, and that absence of trouble sounded better than any engine. The president emailed a single line of thanks and closed the thread before debate could warm up again that evening for once at last. We kept the cones in a shared bin and the meter in storage, learning which tools belonged on the street and which belonged in a drawer. Mornings grew lighter and so did tempers as routines replaced arguments and trust replaced proof in small daily ways for. By May, the review became a paragraph in the handbook, plain enough to read before coffee and flexible enough to work before sunrise. It said safety first and neighbors always, and left room for storms to write their own footnotes when they arrived unannounced at night. I put the blower away and kept the fuel can ready, a compromise between seasons that felt like the street's personality. We waved more and measured less, knowing the next winter would test us again but trusting the map we had drawn together under cold skies. When the last snow finally melted, the sound it left behind was not silence but agreement, a quiet earned by work done at the right time. Rules stayed on the wall and roads stayed open in memory of mornings that taught us how to listen while summer arrived with lessons still fresh, and the block learned to practice them without snow. We tested the protocol with heat waves and fallen branches, treating debris like drifts and shade like ramps. The cones came out when trucks couldn't turn, and texts replaced shouts. I fixed the blower and labeled the fuel can, not for noise but for readiness. The president started walking the route at dusk, mapping shadows and blind corners. The filmer edited a clip about teamwork and posted it without names. Quiet grew from habit, not fear, and mornings kept their order even when the sky stayed blue and still. Lessons carried forward into every ordinary day together again slowly now. By autumn, the rule felt like furniture, something you noticed only when it moved. Leaves piled where snow once drifted, and the same turns pinched the same tires. We swept the bus stop before rain could turn it slick, and the nurse still texted at dawn when her shift ended late. Arguments thinned into updates, and the chat learned punctuation instead of volume. The lawyer sent a note praising the clause he had doubted, and the meter never left the drawer. Change proved durable when it wore a simple coat and fit everyone's shoulders. Even the wind seemed to cooperate with our schedule now. Winter returned on a whisper, a light snow that asked whether we remembered. The cones appeared without instruction, and I waited for the threshold text before touching the cord. When it came, I cleared only the spine and the stop, leaving side paths for shovels and boots. The president watched the curve, the filmer marked hazards, and the man with the bin salted the ramp. No flyers came back. No charts were shared. The bus rolled through and kept its time. We finished early and drank coffee while the sun did the rest, proving the system could be loud once and quiet forever. Memory had become a tool we could trust daily. Looking back, the rule taught us how to read each other's clocks. Noise had a place, and so did rest, but safety owned the minute between them. We learned to write policies with boots on and to listen when engines spoke. The street changed shape, not by force but by use, and every storm left a margin note we could keep. I still start at 5 when the weather demands it, and I stop when the road agrees. Quiet returns like a reward, and the neighborhood wakes to a path made by everyone at once. That is how mornings finally learn to belong. The last storm of the year came late, a surprise after weeks of clear mornings. I woke before the text arrived and waited anyway, watching flakes stitch the dark into something readable. When the message finally lit the screen active storm, it felt less like permission and more like a reminder of what we had built. I started with the spine of the street and left the rest to shovels and sun. Cones marked the bus stop and the curve. The nurse waved from her steps. The filmer nodded and wrote down the slick patch by the hydrant. The president stood back with her clipboard and a scarf, measuring nothing but the way people moved together. We finished early and shut off the engine before it could become the story again. By noon, the road was ordinary. Cars passed without slipping. Children stepped off the bus without sliding. Quiet returned because it had earned the right to be there. No one posted charts. No one asked for proof. The system worked because it belonged to everyone. That afternoon, the board updated the handbook with one more sentence: when conditions threaten access, neighbors coordinate to clear priority paths before peak traffic. It wasn't poetry, but it was true. It named the bus stop, the hydrant, the curve, and the clock. It turned a fight about sound into a habit of care. I cleaned the blower and stored it where I could reach it without waking the house. The fuel can sat beside it like a promise I hope to keep only when needed. Outside, the cones rested in their bin. Inside, the chat went quiet in a good way, the kind that means people are busy living instead of arguing. Winter taught us that rules don't make roads, people do. Noise is a tool, not a weapon. Silence is a reward, not a right. Timing can be an answer when words fail. And fairness, when it works, sounds like an engine that stops at sunrise. Next year will bring new storms and maybe new complaints. Someone will remember the flyers. Someone will forget the claws. The street will test us again. But we have a map now, drawn with tire tracks and coffee cups and a decision to start when it matters most. If you walk our block in the early dark, you won't hear much. You'll see cones where the ice hides and a lane where the bus needs to be. You'll notice doors opening, not to shout but to help. The lesson is simple and hard at once: shared time makes shared rules possible. I used to think the point was to follow the letter. Now I think the point is to keep the road. When the snow comes, we answer with work. When the work is done, we give the morning back its quiet. That's the balance we learned, and it's the only one that lasts.
If you enjoyed the, don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends and drop your thoughts in the comments.